Okay, welcome everyone. I am Tim Erlin. I'm the VP of Product at WallArm, and I am thrilled that you are here today to spend a little bit of time with us. We're going to talk about modern APIs and modern threats, spend a little bit of time on some of the tools that exist in this space, what they're good at, what they're not. And joining me today to help out, I've got a couple of guests here, a couple of experts, if you will. We've got James Rulison, who's a director of solutions engineering, joining us. We've got Jeremy Dodson, who is the founder of Peaked Solutions and a former CISO as well, joining us. Thanks to both of you for being here for this webinar. A couple of housekeeping items to start with. This is being broadcast both on Zoom and on LinkedIn Live, so you may be watching it on either of those platforms. It will remain available on LinkedIn, so if you're looking for a recording, it's a great place to grab it as LinkedIn, and you can always watch it again or share it there if you want. If you have questions during the webinar, you can put them in the comments on LinkedIn, or you can use the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll try and address those questions as they come up or at the end, depending on how the conversation's going and what the questions look like. So that's the plan. Those are the housekeeping items. Why don't we go ahead and get started here? Uh, we're going to try and cover sort of three broad areas today in this webinar. We'll spend a little bit of time at the start just talking about the technology trends around APIs overall, because those technology trends really inform that second topic, which is the API security landscape. And then finally, we'll dive into some of the tools in the API security toolbox, if you will. Talk about what they do well, where the advantages and disadvantages are, and hopefully provide you with some useful guidance about how to address the threats that we talked about earlier in the webinar. So that's the overall plan, and hopefully it is interesting and we get some good conversation going. So let's start with the trends around APIs themselves. Um, as I said, the reason I wanted to include this section, which is not specific to security, is because the security implications, the security landscape, if you will, follows that technology landscape that we're seeing with APIs. And this is not a new pattern, right? We've seen, so attackers follow the money is a popular saying. We've seen security landscapes shift around other trends in the past, from virtualization to containers to cloud, and now APIs. So I've got three trends that I put up here, and a little bit of a data point for each of them. I'm curious, Jeremy, from your perspective, if we start with the first one around API first development, what I pulled out here was a stat from Postman's most recent State of API report. 74% of respondents are API first in 2024, which is up from 66% in 2023.
Yeah.
Where do you see that trend, or what impact do you see that trend having, sort of in development overall?
Well, so I often say now that day zero decisions help to stop 0 days. And this is just kind of proving my point. And I laugh at this number when you put it up. I feel that this number is actually low. The number of people that are doing wrappers in chat or anything else, all of it's API. Like you jump into the next point on that. And I would say that number is grossly underreported. I think anyone that's spinning something up right now using any sort of tool that they weren't using a couple years ago means that they are dealing with APIs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about what API first development means, because maybe it's worth talking about what the alternatives might be. Like if you weren't doing API first development, what would you be doing?
Yeah, I guess that's true. So from my perspective, you look at individuals that are building repos that are all self-contained, that don't tie in, have no integrations, um, and are specifically solving problems that are internal facing are the only ones lately that I've been seeing that aren't API first development and or aren't utilizing APIs. But even then, I find it hard in specific environments unless you're in regulated spaces to even find those. And even in those regulated spaces, we're finding where people are cutting corners to work through that.
Yeah, yeah. James,
Yeah,
what comes to mind for you when we talk about API first development?
Yeah, I mean the same thing, right? It's like if you think about it now, everyone like when you're building your connections and building your applications, it's nothing more than a way to share the data that you have stored or the collection of data you have stored. So all of those are being done through API, right? So I mean, it's the way the protocols and the technologies has evolved. It's no longer like the way that you're building an application. You have to almost have to use API. In fact, when you brought up API first development and you had these numbers, I had to quickly look up to remind myself. I believe that it's now 80% of all internet traffic is done over an API, right? So it's
Yeah.
it's it's the only form of communication almost these days. It's very hard to find a non real
Yeah.
API solution out there
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
Especially
I've
when
done a
speed is so important. I think that's probably why it's also heading that way. Like you either have to write your own authentication methods or you're using some sort of module. You either have to
right.
write your own.
sure.
Yeah.
You know
Or
that
the only other the thing I would say is like the only things that are not utilizing APIs are legacy kind of a classic business that does not do anything online that might have like like here's about us, here's our pricing, here's how you contact us, and that's all they got on there. I mean, if that's all they got on there, then that's probably the only thing I can think of that would not really have an API driven solution.
yeah, so James, your implication there is about web applications.
Yeah.
Um, of course, prior to web applications, there were client server applications with a thick client. So that's an alternative to API first development that nobody's really doing anymore. And then we talk about web applications, which at some point, weren't built on top of APIs and now are primarily API driven. So you've got so-called single page applications that are really I like the metaphor of three raccoons in a trench coat pretending to be a web page. It's a bunch of APIs in a trench coat pretending to be a web application, right? Um, so it's really API first. You build all those APIs and then you put a skin on top of it to make it usable by a human being. Um, and that's what we're talking about with API first development. James, you brought up that statistic about what percentage of internet traffic is APIs. I've done in the past. I've done kind of a deep dive on that, where that comes from. There are a couple of different stats. One is 80%, one's 83%. I think one was 74% from three different sources. All of those are now, I think, at least 3 years old. Um,
Correct.
and they're,
Yeah, with
they're
Akamai and some other of the companies that are out
yeah,
there that are tracking. Yeah,
they're
totally
good
with you.
stats, which is why they have a long shelf life. But
Yeah,
they're probably underreported at this point.
yeah. The same thing we were talking about. I was at a different conference and we were talking about bot traffic, and somebody says, "Oh, I think bot traffic's like 34," and I said, "Yeah, that was last year. We're over 40% this year. But bots are all also API driven, which
Yeah.
is kind of crazy."
Well, it brings up an interesting question when you talk about bots, which is probably a little off topic of if you're talking about when you're talking about web applications, a bot is an automated tool for interacting with the web app. When you're talking about APIs, aren't they all bots really? I mean, maybe there's a human being at some point in the chain, but APIs are built for programmatic interaction. So there are
Yeah,
no
in
human
essence,
Well, bots, but
beings.
I
but
don't
they
think
can
they're
hide
out there.
themselves a lot more though. So for
Exactly.
example, Cloudflare has built-in by functionality now that if it's an AI bot going to scrape a web page, it's saying no, but you can bypass that by wrapping it in an API call and get the exact same data, then do a handoff back to your AI agent
Yeah.
to report back. So it's just these weird functionality skips. I mean, no, you can't, James. I mean,
There- yeah, there was some flack for that blocking policy because not everybody wanted all of that traffic blocked in the end, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a
I'm,
great step forward in trying to at least by default protect some things because there's so much change that on the defense side you don't quite know when you have to understand. I remember like this is kind of touching on a different point, but DMARC and all those things February 2023 when no one paid attention to has to happen at this point and everyone was getting their business emails sent to spam all over the place. There's always so much to pay attention to. So I like the organizations that are sort of helping people along. Hey, we want to make sure that you understand what can happen to your environment, that
mm,
how this can affect the way your APIs are even collecting data on what's getting hit in your web app and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we kind of brought up the topic of AI, which is the second key trend here. Um, outside of security considerations, AI is obviously a growing trend. It's popular. We can talk about, LLMs and AI apps and agentic AI, but ultimately they're all connected via APIs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are the implications of that fact, if you will, for, the technology landscape?
From my perspective, one of the things that comes to top of mind for the AI and the APIs is the fact that everything you put into a public AI, it learns. So if you have customer or private data, it could become a data loss point. So securing it in kind of like pulling it in and taking that AI and LLM, taking it in house is going to become more common instead of using the open and the public ones, because of the fact is that you're not going to want to share that data outside of your own in-house office.
Yeah. And
That's
take
what.
it even further, when we hopefully when organizations build applications, they're heavily documenting APIs and everything that they rely on. What I have noticed is the trend of, and I don't know if people just think it's more complicated or whatever, but when we'll go into an organization and see everything that might have been documented well, and they ignore how they send data to OpenAI or how they send
Yeah.
data to Perplexity or how they send data to whatever, because they just assume that it's handled on that end and don't have the good um, I can't think of the word, but hygiene, I guess, to
Mm,
say we need to document how we're interfacing with these as well and what the limitations are, how what data goes in, what sort of side channel attacks can happen, what oversharing might occur because of this information, like James was sort of alluding to.
yeah.
Um, there's a responsibility, as always, to document and secure even what's connected in these APIs that people apparently aren't understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to add to that really quick is the fact that you have a lot of people who don't understand that the team messaging solution you might be using has AI in it. The ticketing
Hmm.
system for support has AI in it. Salesforce, HubSpot all have AI in it. So wherever you're putting that data, you need to understand and document what what is how that's being handled and how that's being conveyed to track the security level of it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
It is amazing and fascinating how, with AI in particular, how quickly organizations have just sort of abandoned some of the policies that they've had around, for example, documenting things. That it's just like, oh no, we can't do that. It's AI. We'll catch up. We'll do it later. And it just isn't. It doesn't happen for sure. The other interesting thing here, you mentioned a couple of different option, companies there or products. When we talk about agentic AI, um, it's not just APIs to connect to those agents, but those agents, the whole point of the agents is to take some action.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
they're reaching out to other systems to take action, whether it's, changing a dinner reservation, as I think we saw in a Super Bowl commercial, or, making a flight reservation. That connection, that's all API driven as well, right?
Mhm.
And maybe they're connecting to other agents.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's sort of what I was talking about earlier, where you then have all this reporting of how many people have connected in, but we have to understand that all of this needs to be split and tracked differently, because all too often you have what used to be signatures or heuristics around how things are connecting. We would defend it differently if we knew it was an API call versus a human trying to attack it, or not attack, trying to utilize an
It's a
instance over and
little
over
bias
again.
there, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, it's a weird line for me. Um, but these agents, just like the new age captchas, which is how mouse movements happen and all of that, they're going to become more difficult to capture as far as what is being connected if we're not being honest about how we're connecting into that service.
Mm,
And this is
yeah.
where we, again, that double-edged sword with what I was saying with Cloudflare earlier, is like when we start writing tools to bypass restrictions, again, this is sort of that business logic, right? When we're using the service the way we're supposed to use it, but we're still not a human interacting, this is
Hmm.
where we're going to cause a lot of problems for ourselves down the road.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Jeremy, also on that Cloudflare side, they can go in and turn that off.
Yep.
That's a valid option. But then you lose like all the other AIs. Then now have free access to the material. I wish there was a little bit more granular on the
I was
controls
just
with
going
the
to say that.
interface.
Yeah, that's going to be the next step, and I'll be even happier when they do
Yeah,
offer granularity and some sort of listing or context aware as well,
yeah.
building that logic out.
Yeah.
Yeah, with us, when we were doing like a lot of the bot mitigation, we started having a little bit of fun with it. If we figured out that it was a known bad bot, you could redirect it to we had custom responses and everything like that you could send it to. So we would send it to like an HTML page that says you're a bad bot and just loop it, right? So it would be stuck going back and forth into that you're a bad bot, you're a bad bot, you're a bad bot. You could have some fun with that, but the Cloudflare side of it, I will be looking forward to them getting a little bit granular as well on it.
Awesome.
So the third trend I wanted to touch on here is the rise of APIs as business critical infrastructure, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to being, something that's just a piece of technology. Organizations now have transactions, financial transactions, purchases, all of these things running over APIs, which puts them in this position of being absolutely business critical. And I think that's a trend that if you're in IT, you probably see, but if you're not, it's kind of snuck up on us that these APIs are they're part of generating revenue now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most of the customers that I deal with or dealt with are on the e-commerce side. All the APIs were at some form of revenue generation, whether that's direct through like you're utilizing and building your application within the environment, or whether that's something as simple as an API for a chatbot that's talking to your support organization. Those APIs are still revenue because the response that it has, whether it's a chatbot or not, is still a reflection of your organization. So it's those all can directly impact your financial
Yeah.
impact. And I was going to add, I saw that Thad was asking about the
Yep.
tech debt and the API security, and yeah, it's one of the reasons why we built our own attack surfaces. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that I preach attack surfaces management. It's the problem you have is that when you're in IT and you're working in different companies, when you start, there's going to be somebody who started that job before you, or at least most of the case, in most cases. And if you didn't start it, you don't know what's there. And there's a high probability that there is something that somebody forgot to decommission that's running out there that you might not be aware of. It could be an API that's no longer used or supposed to have been discontinued, but some legacy customer didn't want to update their code. So you still got that API running. That is always out there. It's happening all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
think
just a real quick touch point on that. I think the biggest, most visible one right now is things like these LinkedIn bots that will go in and try and scrape data, work on behalf of someone. They are constantly evolving purposefully to bypass any restrictions and EULA agreements. And it's funny because these companies that are starting these up will be like, yeah, you may get banned for a few days, but then we'll get you back. And then I keep our organizations keeps coming in and analyzing that code going, why is this a good idea? And again, it's this business, like they built their model for making money on this AI being able to abuse these APIs as they touch them.
Yeah,
So,
and I put a website up online for a friend the other day, and we literally saw within the first hour scanning for WordPress APIs, like instantly looking for it. I mean, we had fun. We redirected all the WordPress requests to FBI.gov, but it was it's still amazing how fast that they get those things spun up and attacking your site or scanning your site.
so. You guys have both said actually really interesting things I want to emphasize. So first of all, James, you inadvertently made a point that I think is important. I was really associating revenue generation with business criticality, but you made the point that there are actually a host of APIs that are business critical that aren't directly tied to revenue. So they might be tied to
Right.
customer experience or the ability for a customer to actually engage effectively. Like it's not direct revenue, but it is important.
Right.
I think that's key. And then Jeremy, you pointed out that business criticality goes both ways. So it's not just the APIs you're producing that might be how a purchase happens with your business, but the APIs that your marketing automation is engaging with, those are
Mhm.
also business critical. And in fact, that your marketing your marketing tools might be abusing
Yeah.
intentionally. And so now you have business critical APIs, business critical processes that are built on abusing APIs, which is an interesting place to be too. All
Yeah.
right, so we've talked about these three key trends. Let's jump ahead to the API security landscape itself. Um, Normally, when we talk about the API security landscape, we tend to throw up a bunch of, sort of statistics and examples and anecdotes to sort of, generate a sense of how this landscape is, what kind of threats are out there. But I think I wanted to do something a little different in this instance and actually talk about sort of categories of attacks. Because I think we all know if you're on this webinar, you already know that API attacks are a real thing that happen. And you probably have seen some incidents yourself that, either in your own organization or in the news. I tend to find that this breakdown of attack types is useful for, just understanding the threat landscape, really. So we'll start with this idea of stateless attacks. Um, these are attacks that can be carried out with a single request, exploited via a single request. They don't require, extensive, uh, multi-request chains of interaction in order to be successful. I put a few examples up there. I don't know, Jeremy, do you have a favorite example? You could pick one that I put up there of like a stateless attack, API attack.
Um, I mean, stateless is always going to be, unfortunately, still reigning champion. It's going to be SQL injection stuff that I,
Yeah.
for some reason, am upset every time I find. I don't even like documenting things when we do those things. But I think lately cross-site scripting is becoming awkwardly more
Mm,
abundant because of all the different systems that get built and put together. So you have JSON attacks with cross-site scripting, gathering data that I shouldn't be able to gather. I'm no longer going after logins. I'm purposely going after the data that's being exposed via
yeah.
API.
Yeah.
And so
That's
it's
really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's been an awkward shift in that, which almost negates the need for a SQL injection unless I'm trying to add data into a space where I want to move around. But um, yeah, stateless attack is, I don't know, almost boring to me.
Well, this is part of the problem is that it from a security standpoint, these are well understood. They tend to be perceived as a little bit boring, but they remain
But
fairly
yes,
effective.
they're
Yes.
still, and
The number of like not used properly CORS files is insane, right? So for the cross-site scripting and stuff, it's just not properly documenting it, not properly adding domains, or not removing domains. It is one of the most common ones we saw in our SOC from
yeah.
customer standpoints. It was just like, are you kidding me? I mean, I'm sure the SOC team really hated having to deal with those, but it was definitely one of the most common ones.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the awkward part is these are patterns that are so well known. I guess anti patterns, depending on which side you're on. These are anti patterns that are so well known. I don't know how they make it into an environment with
Uh,
CI/CD, with different scanning, with stuff that's available to developers. To me, it just seems like we're not properly training. We're not properly even people. And it's funny because people that are using AI tools, they still don't know how to prompt these tools to even make something. So you'll see things, people vibe coding or doing whatever they're doing, and they're still creating these patterns that should just not exist
well,
in
but
these
that makes perfect
applications.
sense
Yeah.
because if you think about the development of AI and what it might have been trained on, and the
Yeah.
prevalence of
Okay.
these
Yeah.
types of errors, they're out there, and so they're going to continue to be out there unless you specifically train those AI tools to avoid them, for sure. But I agree with you, Jeremy. It's always surprising and shocking to see how effective these sort of simple stateless attacks are, and continue to be. I don't know if it's lack of training or code reuse or a combination of all those things, but they remain very effective. Absolutely.
I would say it's also a combination of kind of what Jeremy was saying. I don't think it's lack of training. I think it's refreshing of the training.
Mm.
Everyone in
Good point.
development kind of already had that training, and then they just forget about it because they haven't had to worry about it for however many months they were on the development cycle where they last put it in. When they put that kind of security for the stateless type inspection in, then they move on to actually building something else, and it could be 6 months before they're actually going back to where they need to actually re-add or do something for stateless inspections. And then that's why, because they need to be refreshed. They need to have, it's something that needs to be brought up as topical more often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to the way that people develop. Like even when they're creating something simple or it has tons of APIs, they're still not doing specifications when they build. So spec driven. They're still not doing tests or building tests that are all over the place. They're not documenting. Like if you ask them about their app, they know about this part of it and the rest of it someone else wrote the code, so they don't understand it. And it's
Or
in my
they're depending
opinion
on
an
the
unacceptable answer.
right, or they're depending on their WAF to pick it up, or their WAF solution, right?
Correct.
So they, they're thinking that the WAF and WAP that they have in place is going to catch all of it, and it's obviously not. If the signature's not there, it's not going to catch it.
Well, and we'll get to this when we talk about WAFs. There are also bypasses, right? Lots of
Yeah.
options to bypass. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the second category here of stateful attacks, because they're a little bit different, right? So now we're talking about attacks that are generally multi-request attacks. So the examples I put up here were credential stuffing, data scraping. Yes, one login attempt could be caught as a credential stuffing attempt, but generally speaking, you're attempting to validate a whole database full of compromised credentials, or you're attempting to scrape all the data for something. And these are not things that the tools tend to see as a single request, but a stateful attack that occurs over the course of a session over multiple requests.
Yeah, for me,
category.
one that I'm going to go into the etc. Because replay attacks are my absolute favorite in this category, because it's the best way to get past logs when people don't know what to look for or when tools aren't configured. This usually becomes a misconfiguration where they just don't know how to configure for something that has already happened or that is happening in sequence. It's an interesting attack when you get past tools that should just inherently understand that.
Yeah. That's a good example. I appreciate you filling in the etc. It's good. The last category we have here is business logic abuse, which is something that, if you go back a couple of years, I would have probably rolled into stateful, but I think it's becoming something, especially with API security, something that is a separate category of attacks, where it's not just that it's a series of requests, it's that it's actually leveraging the API's business logic in order to accomplish a malicious objective, if you will. And this is something that I think we're seeing more often, but is still largely undetected and underreported, because it's hard to identify. When you're operating within the normal parameters of an API, but you're accomplishing an objective that you're not meant to be able to accomplish, it's difficult to detect.
It
So
also becomes.
Yeah, please, James.
I was gonna. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was gonna say that it also comes down to how loud they want to be, right? So if they want to toot their own horn and publicly announce that they got all this data, great, from business logic, then you know about it. But if they're smart and they're more methodical, they're pulling data slowly. You may never even know that they've been abusing that business logic because they be having another nefarious purpose that they have behind.
Yeah. I think you teed up oh no, I changed examples. I thought you had teed up an example. So I pulled out 3 examples of past breaches, incidents that sort of fall into these categories. But now I'll bring up one that I didn't put on the slide, which was an incident that occurred with Dell last year, where you could register as a partner and there was no validation on the partner registration. So anybody could register. And then you had access to pull data on other partners and basically by Dell service tag. And one of the issues that occurred there was that there was no rate limiting on that API to pull the data, and so they were running something like, I don't know, it was like 5,000 requests a second. It was just a crazy amount of data that they were pulling one request at a time, and that falls into sort of a business logic abuse category as well.
I think the same thing with the dating site, right? So
Yeah.
the entity that was both stateful and business logic, right?
Yeah. Explain what happened there for people who weren't paying attention.
So basically, what happened was somebody used valid credentials and figured out that when you make the request, you can change your identification number and pull up somebody else's profile information, and then that gave them access to not only the person's regular detailed information, but also their photo ID that they had to upload to get validated, which all included selfies and driver's license. And there was no rate limiting, so they basically were able to download the entire database by running a script fairly quickly and getting everything pulled down within a 24-hour period. So every person that was on that site's information was completely compromised.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was,
That's
I don't know if I think you brought it up that somebody made a countered one, like an anti-T, and then they had the same flaws.
Yeah. I at the risk of repeating a headline without reading the article, I did see something about someone creating a clone of the T site essentially, and then cloning some of the same issues that they had as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the example I put up here for business logic abuse was 23andMe because it was well known. It involved multiple flaws. So there was credential stuffing to gain access to the account, but the business logic piece was that once you have a login through 23andMe, you have access to all of the data about the quote unquote genetic relatives of that account. And so the attackers were able to take a relatively small number of successful logins and dramatically expand the amount of data they were able to compromise by using that logic in their APIs in order to do so. So the two other examples are pretty straightforward, right? Duolingo was a stateful credential, stateful scraping, data scraping incident, which Duolingo actually, their response was, this data is public. There's no problem here. But what it was you can take any email address, put it into a request, and get information about that Duolingo account. If it exists, including a username and some of the stats about their language learning journey, if you will. But Duolingo just said, well, it's public data, so it's fine, and then move it. Yeah, go ahead,
I
Jeremy.
love when people just think innocuous data is not useful. But one of the other things I was thinking about last night when you were looking at these 3 levels of API attacks was, and we sort of touched on it, was another category of AI and agentic prompt sort of attacks that use other APIs that aren't supposed to, right? You mentioned goes out and gets a ticket. Well, if you prompt very cleverly, you can have it do it in a forceful way, like, I need you to get it at this price as much as possible. And if you are the one that controlled that agent, you can write to like flip things. So instead of purchase, then confirm, you can confirm, then purchase.
Yeah.
Right. So it's using this logic, but you're writing these tools to do all of this stuff and essentially become the attacker, and it doesn't quite know better if you don't put guardrails in place.
Yeah.
So just other ways of interestingly tying these 3 together using agents.
Absolutely. And it depends a little bit on what the agent system prompt is, right? Is it intended to be as helpful as possible? Well, it might be just a little more helpful than
a little too helpful.
A little too helpful, if you will. Yeah. You could have the agent say, well, I can't get this for free, so maybe I just need to write an exploit in order to get it. Go do that.
Yeah.
So for air travel, see Jeremy, got it. If I want to get a cheap airline ticket somewhere.
Yeah. Well, so I also, from one of the first use cases that I built with I forget what the damn thing was called, the orange block, Rabbit something, or
that Rabbit R1.
Rabbit R1. There we go. So one of the first use cases I had done for that, which is having a conversation with someone and having the concept of Rabbit R1. I ended up building a tool that did it differently because it wasn't quite ready. but having it go out, and I would say having a conversation with James, maybe I know something about his background and I say, hey, I love this too. And then it immediately going out and spinning up infrastructure in AWS, building out some sort of, malware driven website that then I say, hey, I'd love for you to go check out my work in this topic. And in the middle of that conversation, that infrastructure being spun up live. It's a way we would do normally attacks. I guess I'll say back in the day, about a decade ago, where we would have conversations and someone was doing that manually. Having agents go off and do that now is absolutely insane, and in my opinion, should be regulated in a little bit better way for from an attack standpoint. But it is absolutely fascinating to see what we can get these agents to do that they really shouldn't be able to do without more transparency and without accountability as well, because all of that can be done fully anonymously instead of being tied to
it's
something.
like just-in-time social engineering, basically, right?
Correct.
Yeah, exactly right. That is scary to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Well, so it's interesting. The last example I put up here just to cover it is the MoveIt incident, which was a SQL injection vulnerability that impacted thousands of companies. So we were talking about these injections being boring but also continuously effective. That's an example of certainly a significant impact.
That was a big one. Yeah.
But you provided a transition to the next slide in here, which is about the OWASP business logic abuse top 10. So just a little background here. The business logic abuse top 10 is a new top 10 list with OWASP, sort of sits alongside some of the technology centric ones like the top 10 for APIs or the top 10 for mobile or the top 10 for LLMs or the original top 10 for web applications. But the intent of the business logic abuse top 10 is to be sort of technology agnostic. So to describe these business logic abuse conditions in a way that isn't tied to a specific technology. And so I think you were describing an example of the second one, this concurrent workflow order bypass, right? So you can convince an agent to skip a confirmation step and go straight to payment, or skip a payment step and go straight to shipping. That would be an example of that sort of, skipping a step, category, if you will. So, we're not going to read through all of these, but I thought it was an interesting alternative conversation about how we might categorize business logic abuse, without talking about the specific technology involved in a way that's useful as we talk about incidents and attacks going forward.
Yeah, I kind of want to. I can't believe I'm telling this story live. One of the first attacks I did prior to me being paid to be doing attacks. So one that was a bad attack, we'll say, and I'll keep everything anonymous. But it was on the same concept of business logic. It was understanding the way the business ran so well that I could bypass their methods. So you would make a whole list. Let's say you'd go to their site and you'd list 100 objects that you wanted to sell. And you would then open up another browser, bring that whole shopping cart in and purchase the cheapest thing that they had on the list. And that would be what you would pay for. So you'd pay $1 for 100, $10,000 worth of stuff. Yeah. And then when you sent it off, that looked at validation and would say, yes, they spent $1, but the warehouse would get the full list of everything that was supposed to be put in a box.
Right.
And this is one of those things where when you expose what happens, and the reason is because the first time I, was purchasing stuff back when I was young and dumb, I realized that these two checkboxes were completely not communicated. It was, we take care of one thing and someone else takes care of the other thing. And it was such a dramatic impact to that organization, but it all came from just innocuous data. This is what kind of might tie back to the innocuous information. What's not that big of a deal. If you know something about the way the business runs or about the way the API runs or about the way the calls are happening and how people are tying these things together, you're able to constantly look for these calls and leverage that information, if you will.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why I also said earlier, it is the responsibility of the people building the apps to understand everything that they include, not just handing off responsibility. This isn't a shared responsibility model like you have with, AWS or Azure, who takes care of the hardware while you take care of the data on top. This is still a layer that you're responsible for, that you could have written all of these components of your app, but you're choosing to speed up your delivery by not developing those modules and trusting someone else. Well,
Yeah.
this is where
It's
that SBOM comes in, and where shadow APIs come in, and everything else. So
it's super interesting to think about business logic abuse as the technical implementation of social engineering, right?
correct.
Yeah.
So whereas you might manipulate a person to skip a payment step, now you're talking about manipulating technology, and you do that by understanding, as you point out, Jeremy, how their application works better than the individual developers who built the pieces of it.
That is the best way to say that, because that is
Yeah, and
exactly true. It's understanding it better than the people that were building it. That way, they never even know what to look for.
Hmm.
This is
and,
why
and
it's important to have that observability. Go ahead, James.
I was gonna say that not only is it that exactly that, but as companies continue to utilize third-party vendors to tie in, understanding that communication between those two-party vendors, it's an abuse waiting to happen, right? Because these guys over here, company A only knows what they're building, and company B is the guys who are delivering the said widgets. They only know what they're doing, and they are only taking whatever is requested across. It's I completely understand how that is a huge potential abuse point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of questions I think that are probably appropriate to answer sort of at this point, since we're talking about the threat landscape overall. The first question is, are you seeing AI abuse of APIs? Um, uh, this is an interesting question to me because I don't think there have been any publicly disclosed incidents that where the root cause has been AI abuse of an API. But I think anecdotally, I hear a lot of concern from, CISOs and practitioners about exactly this problem. I don't know what you two have experienced around that,
Oh,
if there's something
it's
to share there.
very much happening. It's just not necessarily leading to breach. I guess we'll say the good news is the intent, and this kind of goes to that LinkedIn model that I was talking about earlier. The intent is not to um, abuse the data or abuse it for malicious intent. It always has we're just helping our client solve a problem. So we're problem solving and doing something we're not supposed to be doing, and or having it gather data because we know that it will gather data. There are people who do it accidentally, we have found, and there are
Sure.
people that are really good, like we were just describing, at understanding that this API into this space is allowing more data out than it should.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that goes to API design as well. Like, how much data should you allow to happen from an API, or how much should you expose to your backend logic? Which I don't know why I didn't think about it until just now. But that is also another really huge thing. There are people out there that look at your own documentation and go, "Oh, I can misuse that."
And,
yeah,
and I'll add,
absolutely.
I'll add, I'll add to that I won't give out the name, but you can probably Google and find it. But there's a fast food chain who now uses an AI order taking system. So it's a chat person, and that is connected via API to the price system. And you can abuse the order taking system by talking to it outside to where you can get the prices changed on your food and beverages. And they have
I
not,
love it.
as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, they have not yet patched it. But because we may or may not have gotten a $6, $6 or paid $6 for the food for $50 for the food. So it's just it's definitely happening out there. That's for sure.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's interesting because your example is abuse of AI versus AI abuse of APIs, and both of them are
Yeah,
probably
sure.
right. They're both
Yeah,
Well,
happening.
so all that is human in the loop, though.
Yeah,
I mean, he's doing a clever way to have AI abuse that API. It's doing things that aren't in its
yeah,
purview,
yeah,
but it's 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 an interesting problem set.
it
That's
sure
one of the
is.
reasons why I've been so excited. I think I mentioned this last time we talked, Tim. I've been so excited lately because the problem sets that are happening because of APIs and because of AI with all of that, it's it's almost like it's interesting again. because they're simple. They're older attacks with a new spin that is making people hyper aware of what a lot of us security special engineers and security researchers have been like stomping our foot trying to get people to see. But now it's happening at scale, and it can't be ignored.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So let's I think that's really interesting, and I could dive deep on that, but I'm conscious of where we are in the time, and I want to make
Correct.
sure we
Yeah.
actually get to the security tools conversation too. So part of the point of this whole point of this webinar was to talk about some of the tools that exist in the API security toolbox and what they're good at and what they're maybe not so good at. So let's start with the classic web application firewall. We mentioned WAFs earlier. I've got up here sort of a what are WAFs good at, but what aren't they generally good at? So where from your perspective does a WAF fit into the API security space? Is it useful? Is it not useful? What do you see as the advantages and disadvantages?
So from our perspective, when we're talking to clients, it is nothing more than another layer of security.
Mm-hmm.
You have to continue to add more and more layers, but you cannot expect it to be a one-all catch-all, especially when it comes to APIs, because most of the WAF, at least the ones that I've dealt with for API-based security, they're looking at the schema and the format and making sure that it's formatted correctly. But as we already talked about, there's business logic ways that you can bypass it, which still adheres to the format, but you're still able to abuse it. So I mean, from that perspective, I see it as useful, but it's only like a layer of additional security. And
Yeah.
as you I think you mentioned earlier, Tim, there's ways around it, right? Because if it's a cloud-based WAF and somebody's not smart enough to just whitelist their cloud vendor, you can find their origin fairly easy
Yeah.
and then just bypass the WAF.
There was an incident that came up with exactly that problem. I can't remember which vendor it was, but basically it was, yes, the WAF is in place and it's providing protection, but all the origins are easily available, and you just go around it. A
Yeah.
literal
Dave,
WAF
so
bypass.
you're putting me in an uncomfortable state because typically those are the things that I say, but I'm going to be less, I guess, doom and gloom, which feels a little weird for me. And I will say that it's very important to understand what your tools are designed to do.
Mhm.
And don't expect them to do anything else. We have to educate ourselves. I have, from my background, for those that know it, for decades been talking about how VPN is not a way to secure anything. Wasn't by design. It was just great marketing. And if you look at any other tool, WAF or otherwise, understand what the capabilities are, understand and document what the boundaries are, and then plan for outside those boundaries. You have to understand what they're for. And if you don't, and especially if you listen to marketing, WAF is all you ever need, or VPN is all you ever need, and none of that is true.
Yeah.
We have to. I like how you said it. It's the old Swiss cheese or layer in defense or any of those things, but it's just layering your tools in a way that highlights the strength of those tools and then understanding the gaps and filling those gaps in.
Interestingly, and apropos of maybe nothing, if you ask anyone under probably 30 years old, they will tell you a VPN is a tool used for accessing content you can't get from your geographic location, which is perhaps the more successful implementation of VPNs,
Yeah.
at least the B2C implementation, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I would also add, always undervalue what you're thinking your WAF can do, or so if it's saying it can do this, well, put this, look to the left of this, so
Yeah.
you're overprotecting, because
Yeah.
it's never going to be like I said, the one all fits all. Is somebody asked me the other night, I was at a dinner and somebody asked me, what can I do to secure my home network? I said, unplug it. And he thought I was joking, but it's like, well, I mean, it's if you want it really secure, that's the only way you're gonna get it, is just to unplug it. So
I like the Swiss cheese metaphor, Jeremy, because I think I think it makes sense, right? Intuitively, right? It's not that it does nothing, because it does something.
Oh yeah.
But it has holes, and if you don't understand what those holes are, then you can't
Yeah, you can't plan or
mitigate the things
mitigate
that
or
yeah,
put compensating controls in place.
exactly.
It
Yeah.
should all be about compensating controls and understanding what those things are.
Yeah.
Because not having a WAF when you need one is just as bad as having a WAF and thinking that it protects you 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's a good point.
Another way to look at it is those old coin sorters, right? That starts off by blocking the quarters because the quarters are too big. Then it, the pennies and dimes skip to the next, and nickels skip to the next level, and then
Yeah.
the nickels get taken out because they're slightly too big, and then it gets to the pennies and then to the dimes. So it's just filtering out each layer of those type of attacks, and you got to continue to add more.
But then
Yeah.
here's what blows your mind. The mechanics of that machine get destroyed because of the pocket lint you didn't plan for.
Exactly.
Right? Look at that. Doom and gloom, James. I'm back.
Yeah. And then you have people stuffing pocket lint in there just for fun.
Exactly. They will do that.
What happens
So
when yes.
yeah, let's talk about API gateways for a second, because I think API gateways are absolutely a tool that has a ton of value. And there are some security use cases here, but people often, I think, as James, you were saying, they often believe they overestimate what they're capable of doing. So, API gateways are great at centralizing traffic management. They provide some centralized authentication and authorization, which is a valuable thing to do. But API gateways don't detect and block attacks. That's not what they're about. So you've got that first layer of Swiss cheese, and then you've got some significant gaps to fill in.
The best part about an API gateway is that you can move all the other open APIs into the API gateway, and you've got one place to worry about instead of having 50 places to worry about. At least
Yeah.
that's one of my best thoughts when somebody goes, "Oh, should we add like an API gateway?" I'm like, yeah, centralize as much as you can so that you can,
Yeah.
have your defenses located in one area, and you don't have to have it spread out so thin.
But you bring up an interesting point there, which is the API gateway only knows about the APIs that you've routed through it. So you've got to think about, how do I find, APIs? If you want to call them shadow APIs, you can. How do I find the APIs that I don't know about so that I can pull them into a centralized management function, or, apply mitigating controls elsewhere?
Or another way to call them is zombie APIs too, because we know they're out there running.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I categorize rogue APIs as having three types, right? So there's a shadow API, which is an API that's out there that isn't supposed to be. An orphan API, which is an API that you think is out there that it doesn't actually exist. And then a zombie API is one that you tried to remove, but it didn't actually get removed. And so you can sort of break it down a little bit more detailed if you want, but ultimately they're all some kind of rogue API.
Yeah, you're right. Zombies are the ones that are should have been decommissioned and they're still running around.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then the last, so anything else about API gateways that you want to cover? Okay. So then we come to the last sort of, I skipped a slide. We come to the last slide, which is the API protection tools, which, being a vendor, I'm conscious of the, I can't remember whether it was James or Jeremy who said it, who said, when you talk about WAFs, they tend to say they solve all the problems. Any vendor says they solve all the problems.
Yep.
I think from our perspective, we don't solve all the problems. We solve a very specific set of problems. And that's our objective, is to solve that API security problem, to be that layer of Swiss cheese that catches those things that are API related. But we don't do the centralized traffic management. We don't do the some of the protocol translation that you might get out of an API gateway. We're not a caching and performance optimization tool, so we're not a CDN. But from your perspective, where do you guys see API protection tools fitting or not fitting, in the space?
From my perspective, we were always saying that we were the first layer of an API defense by providing a schema and schema protection. But if you are serious about having API security, we would make you look at WallArm as well as a couple other vendors, which we don't need to name because we're not their advertising for them. But there's only in my opinion, there's only 3 companies that do it as good and as detailed as you guys. And that means the space. There's a lot of people who say that they're API protection, and they're not. They're kind of a glorified API schema with some protections. They're not they're not able to notify or see the ones that are the shadow APIs or other APIs that are
Yeah.
open. So it's definitely going to be key and more important moving forward.
You've mentioned a couple of times schema enforcement or specification enforcement, which I think is important to talk about a little bit because it is a type of API security, right? The idea that you're going to block any traffic that doesn't conform to that specification, which if you have a good specification is a good thing to do. But
Yeah.
they're well, I'll let you, James, talk about where that falls short in some cases.
It falls well. I mean, the business logic is the first one, right? Because I mean, if it's still adhering to the schema, then you're it's it's moot point, right?
Sure. Yeah.
When we talk about it for like trying to simplify it for people who are not like security experts, but they are the ones that control the purse strings for our clients, we're like explaining it like, hey, man, it's basically like the bouncer at the door. He's making sure that you're wearing the right clothes and that you have the right attire on before you go on in. And that's basically what a schema is. It's making sure it's formatted and looks the right way before it goes on. It still does not say whether or not that's going to have that person's not going to have content or some sort of malicious behavior that's behind
Sure.
it. So it only is going to be looking at the actual format. It's not going to be looking at anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, from my perspective, and quickly because of time here, observability into what needs to be protected. We start every security, anything with you cannot protect what you don't know exists.
Yeah.
And so asset discovery and asset awareness is king. And so anything that helps you understand what you're up against arms the defenders with the things that they know are the enclaved things that they need for their data protection initiatives.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah,
So I think
ASM is huge, and I know you guys have one. I actually have used years of guys to try and play around with it. But yeah, it's what was the thing I was mentioning the other day to somebody else? It's like it's not currently in your PCI level 1 compliance. It's not currently in some of the other data governance, but eventually it will be.
Yep.
Because they're going to require you to have that kind of level of vision, because you're not going to just be looking at your stuff. You're going to have to be looking at all of your any of your partners or anybody who's going to be connecting to your solutions. Because if you're working with government contracts, like what was it, Delta? Delta was attacked and breached through a third-party vendor. So you're going to have
Supply
to
chain interdiction. Yep.
Yeah, so you're going to have to start monitoring and scanning your suppliers as well.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know we're at the end of our time here. I want to thank both Jeremy and James for joining us. It was a really interesting conversation. I feel like it could continue for another hour if we really wanted it to, but we'll let everybody off the hook for that. WallArm does have a white paper that you can download that sort of covers this topic in greater detail, if you will. So feel free to reach out for that. And we're also planning our next webinar, which will be around that business logic abuse top 10, actually. So we're going to dive deep on that topic in the next webinar. So feel free to join us. Jeremy, James, thank you so much for your participation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.